Why it seems so difficult to succeed in life, even when you're doing your best. It feels like the harder you try, the more bank debts pile up, anxiety increases, and suffering never lets up. Maybe you look at the 12 apostles and think, they followed Jesus Christ, and yet they faced hunger and challenges. Is this normal? The answer might surprise you. What many don't realize is that these difficulties are part of a greater divine plan. Preparation, refinement, almost as if God is shaping you for something you cannot yet see. But here's what almost nobody tells you. Your financial struggles, your battles with depression, or even that feeling of being stuck in an endless cycle are not signs of failure. On the contrary, they're disguised opportunities. Every difficulty you face today is like a key that can unlock doors to a future of abundance. Not just material, but spiritual, emotional, and eternal. The problem is that without the right guidance, these struggles can seem like punishments rather than platforms for growth. In this content, we will unravel the reasons behind these battles and show you how they can be transformed into foundations for a life of purpose and fulfillment. No matter how far you feel from victory today, there's a path. And it starts here. So, are you ready to discover what God is doing behind the scenes of your life? Many don't understand why those chosen by God, with so much talent and devotion to the gospel, still face hardships like bank debts, hunger, and even anxiety. This might seem like a paradox, but it's not punishment, it's preparation. Think of the 12 apostles, ordinary men, living through financial struggles while walking with Jesus Christ. They weren't wealthy, but they were being shaped for something greater. After all, how could they truly understand the suffering of others if they hadn't experienced lack themselves? The lives of the chosen are not built on shortcuts, and this has a purpose. Financial struggles are not a sign of failure, but a reflection of how God uses these experiences to carve out character. Think about the anxiety Paul must have felt as he wrote letters from prison, knowing the gospel needed to continue. He had every reason to give up, yet he stayed firm, understanding that every trial was part of a larger plan. When someone faces bank debts or financial difficulties, it's natural to question if something is wrong. However, these situations may be God's way of teaching total dependence on Him. After all, if even the 12 apostles experienced hunger and despair, what makes us think we will be spared from our own trials? These moments, as difficult as they may be, deepen our faith and our ability to trust in something beyond what we can see. A practical example of this can be found in managing resources, even in times of scarcity. Have you ever reflected on how some people manage to do so much with so little? It's in these moments that we learn the true essence of Christian stewardship. How about starting today? Perhaps a small, detailed budget or an inspiring book like The Great Commission, which speaks about total commitment to God's work, could be a great starting point. These financial struggles also bring the chosen closer to their mission. When Jesus Christ called the 12 apostles, He knew they would need to understand suffering and hunger to speak with authority about the gospel. Have you noticed how people who faced financial difficulties are often more empathetic? It's as if suffering is a divine school that teaches lessons that cannot be learned any other way. Furthermore, these challenges are a constant reminder that the path of the chosen is not the same as the world's path. Yet, it's in this barren ground that God makes true faith bloom. Ironically, the greatest lessons in spiritual wealth come when pockets are empty. This teaches us that while bank debts are intimidating, they can be the beginning of a deeper understanding of the gospel's role in everyday life. But what happens when these struggles begin to transform? This process of transformation is as fascinating as it is challenging. Just as suffering refined each of the 12 apostles, financial trials shaped the chosen for an even greater mission. And in the meantime, dependence on God becomes not just a mantra, but a living practice. And could all of this be just the beginning of something much greater? Since the days of Jesus Christ, humanity has been tempted to rely on what's in their pockets rather than what's in their hearts. The 12 apostles, for instance, had to learn this lesson firsthand by leaving everything behind to follow the gospel. They trusted that God would provide for their needs, even when they didn't know where the next meal would come from. Today, this trust seems even more challenging, with bank debts and anxiety knocking on the door. Dependence on God is like a muscle. It needs to be exercised during difficulties. Remember the manna in the desert? It was the Israelites' daily food provided by God, but with one condition: they could only gather enough for one day. Imagine the lesson of faith during times of hunger or depression. Today, this might mean praying before making financial decisions or trusting that the right doors will open, even when everything seems uncertain. When financial scarcity strikes, it invites us to abandon trust in riches and embrace divine provision. Think of a farmer planting a seed in the ground without seeing immediate results. He trusts that the harvest will come at the right time. Similarly, when we face financial difficulties, it's essential to cultivate the faith that Jesus Christ is working behind the scenes. After all, even bank debts can be used as a tool to teach us to rely more on God than on money. Many think they need large sums to start transforming their lives, but the truth is that a heart dependent on God can do much with little. For example, if you're dealing with anxiety due to debt, try presenting your finances to God in prayer and planning a budget based on simplicity. Reading something like The Pilgrim's Progress, which speaks about the journey of faith and overcoming, might bring clarity and inspiration to this path. Interestingly, this dependence on God not only strengthens us spiritually, but also redefines our priorities. What once seemed urgent, like the accumulation of wealth, starts to lose its shine when we understand that everything we need is in God. Have you noticed how the gospel doesn't teach that material wealth is the focus, but rather the abundance of faith, peace, and purpose? Even today, Jesus continues to call people to trust in Him above any financial security. This trust in God also helps combat the anxiety the modern world insists on feeding. With every debt notification, with every thought of insufficiency, God offers the opportunity to hand over the burden to Him. Imagine the 12 apostles, living off donations and miracles, with no guarantees about tomorrow. They knew that depending on Jesus Christ was the only way, and this lesson remains relevant, teaching us that true security doesn't come from what we have, but from who sustains us. When we begin to live this way, something extraordinary happens. We learn to walk lightly, trusting that God will provide everything at the right time. But what if these struggles are just the first step of a deeper journey? Could God be preparing the ground to show us the importance of integrity and character? Money has a transformative power, but not always for good. It acts as a magnifying glass, revealing our deepest motivations. Imagine someone who, even while experiencing hunger or depression, decides to share the little they have. This not only reflects a heart shaped by faith, but demonstrates how difficulties are often God's tools to develop our integrity. The apostles, for example, were tempted many times to abandon the gospel for comfort or security. However, they chose to remain faithful, proving that character cannot be sold or traded for temporary riches. Financial trials also act as a mirror for our priorities. Are we more concerned with accumulating wealth or living according to the principles of the gospel? An example is the story of Job, who lost everything but didn't compromise his integrity. Even surrounded by suffering, he stayed firm. And what a lesson this gives us today. How about evaluating your own decisions? Are you maintaining honesty even when the anxiety of making it work gets louder? These trials also refine us in small, everyday decisions. Have you thought about how you react when faced with choosing between paying a late bill or helping someone in need? The way we handle these choices reflects the kind of character God is shaping in us. A good exercise is to list your priorities and ask yourself, am I putting Jesus Christ and the gospel first, or am I letting circumstances dictate my decisions? Interestingly, financial struggles can become a platform to influence others positively. When someone witnesses your faithfulness in the midst of difficulties, it can be more powerful than any sermon. Remember Peter, a simple fisherman with his own struggles, who became an admired spiritual leader. What set him apart was his unwavering character, forged in life's storms, not in his bank account. These situations also prepare us to handle greater blessings in the future. God doesn't entrust significant responsibilities without first testing if we're faithful with small ones. Like the father in the parable of the prodigal son, who knew wealth without maturity could destroy. God allows us to face these tests for our own protection. You can start showing your faithfulness today, even with what little you have. How about creating a simple financial plan and including a commitment to bless others? And so, as integrity and character are shaped through trials, an inevitable question arises. Could these struggles be preparing us for something greater? Perhaps these financial hardships are laying the groundwork for a deeper understanding of spiritual maturity, which God uses to prepare His chosen ones for even bigger missions. The greatest blessings don't always come wrapped in abundance. Often, they come in lessons of spiritual maturity. Think of the prodigal son, who received his inheritance too early and squandered it due to a lack of readiness. God often allows financial struggles to shape us, teaching us to handle His blessings wisely. Just as Jesus Christ prepared His apostles through trials, He also refines us for greater responsibilities. Spiritual maturity grows in barren places, where suffering teaches lessons abundance never could. The 12 apostles experienced this as they left behind jobs, security, and familiarity to follow Jesus. Their faith deepened in the wilderness, where they learned to trust in God alone. Today, financial challenges like bank debts and anxiety serve the same purpose: to strengthen our dependence on divine provision. Imagine someone winning the lottery without learning to manage small amounts of money first. Often, what could have been a blessing turns into a curse. In the same way, God works in our lives, shaping us to receive His promises at the right time. A good exercise is to evaluate how you handle what you already have, whether it's time, money, or skills. Start by tracking your expenses or investing in financial literacy from a Christian perspective. This process of growth also teaches us to see money for what it truly is, not an end but a tool to glorify God. Consider Joseph in Egypt. He endured years of trials before managing the wealth of an empire. God tested and prepared him to use resources wisely and selflessly. Are you allowing your financial struggles to teach you similar lessons in stewardship and purpose? Spiritual maturity doesn't just come before wealth. It reshapes the meaning of wealth itself. Those who've endured scarcity understand the value of even the smallest provision. This perspective transforms lives. When you start seeing your struggles as opportunities for growth, anxiety and depression lose their grip. After all, it's not money that defines your journey, but how you walk alongside Jesus Christ. Moreover, this waiting and growth period draws us closer to God. How can one learn to trust a heavenly Father without ever needing to depend on Him? The 12 apostles witnessed miracles only because they lived in complete dependence on Jesus Christ. What about you? Could this be the time to transform your prayers into heartfelt conversations about your fears and hopes, asking not just for financial solutions, but for the wisdom to handle them? But if spiritual maturity comes before wealth, what happens when we finally reach that point? Could these current struggles simply be the groundwork for an even deeper understanding of the spiritual battles we'll face as we move forward? Perhaps the lessons you're learning today are preparing you for victories far greater than you can imagine. Financial struggles, no matter how earthly they may seem, often have roots in spiritual battles. The Bible is full of examples of how the enemy tries to hinder the progress of God's chosen ones, and the 12 apostles were no exception. As they followed Jesus Christ, they faced hunger, rejection, and persecution. The same happens today. Bank debts, anxiety, and even depression can be tools the enemy uses to distract us from the greater purpose: living and spreading the gospel. Have you ever wondered why financial problems seem to intensify just when you decide to get closer to God? That's no coincidence. It's part of an invisible war where the enemy seeks to sabotage your trust in God. He knows that a heart burdened by anxiety and worries about tomorrow is easily distracted. This is why it's crucial to recognize these battles for what they are. Praying and fasting, for example, are powerful weapons to fight back against spiritual attacks disguised as everyday problems. Imagine someone who is about to do something significant for God's kingdom, like starting a project that will impact lives. It's not uncommon for unexpected financial challenges to arise at that moment. The apostles faced literal and figurative storms while following Jesus Christ. Recognizing that there's a spiritual battle behind these situations changes everything. It allows you to fight with the right tools, like strengthening your faith and staying firmly rooted in your purpose. A practical example of how to handle the spiritual warfare is to intentionally seek God's protection every day. How about starting your mornings by declaring biblical promises over your finances? A verse like Philippians 4 verse 19, "My God will supply all your needs," can be repeated until it becomes a conviction. Surrounding yourself with people of faith and maintaining a consistent Bible reading routine can also make a huge difference in resisting anxiety and fear. Spiritual warfare also teaches us that material resources are secondary to spiritual wealth. Look at Paul and Silas, imprisoned and with nothing, yet worshiping God in the middle of the night. The enemy tried to imprison their bodies, but he couldn't steal their peace and trust. Their story reminds us that even when we face financial struggles, we can choose to focus on what God is doing in our lives and trust that He is in control. We must also remember that in this battle, suffering is not the end, but the beginning of something greater. Jesus Christ never promised a life without problems, but He guaranteed that He would be with us in every struggle. When financial hardships arise, they challenge us to trust in God and resist attacks that try to rob our faith. It may seem hard in the moment, but it's in this resistance that our character is strengthened and our trust in God is deepened. But if financial struggles are part of this spiritual warfare, could they also be preparing us for a brighter future? Maybe they're a training ground for what's ahead, an opportunity to learn and grow before facing even bigger challenges that will require resilience and spiritual preparation. And what if this is just the beginning of preparation for something much greater? Financial struggles, no matter how challenging, are often God's way of preparing us for something far greater. God doesn't waste suffering. Every moment of hunger, anxiety, or debt can be used to shape and strengthen us. Think of the 12 apostles. Before they became pillars of the gospel, they went through challenges that tested their faith and character. Today, the same applies to anyone facing difficulties. It's spiritual training for something yet unseen. This preparation isn't just about what you learn. It's about who you become in the process. Suffering has the power to refine the soul in ways that abundance never can. Imagine someone who, after enduring periods of scarcity, develops empathy and resilience. A great example of this is the story of Joseph, who endured years of trials before being placed as a ruler in Egypt. Could God also be using your financial hardships to prepare you for leadership or greater influence? It's interesting how these seasons of preparation teach us to appreciate the simple things. When you live with little, every small victory feels significant. Perhaps you felt this when paying off a debt or securing a job after a long search. These experiences not only cultivate gratitude, but also equip you to manage resources better when abundance comes. Have you considered using this time to learn more about finances or develop new skills that could be useful in the future? Part of this training also involves letting go of false securities. When Jesus Christ sent the apostles on missions, He instructed them to take nothing but faith. They had to learn that provision would come directly from God, not their possessions. Does this sound familiar? Perhaps your financial struggles are teaching the same lesson, to trust more in God than in money. A good practice is to spend daily time in prayer, reflecting on how God has provided for your needs, even in hard times. Curiously, these preparations don't always make sense at the moment. Sometimes, suffering seems to be just suffering, but like a seed planted in the ground, there is invisible growth happening. Think of someone dealing with financial anxiety today, but using their story in the future to inspire others. Those who have faced debt or hunger know how these experiences build compassion and the ability to offer genuine help. These struggles also have the power to align us with God's purpose. In the midst of difficulties, we're often forced to let go of plans that weren't in line with His will. This may feel like a setback, but it's actually a redirection. Perhaps the opportunity you missed or the bill you couldn't pay is paving the way for something greater. How about starting to see your hardships as part of God's plan rather than a barrier? But what if these struggles aren't just an end in themselves, but a step toward something much greater? Could these financial trials actually be protecting us from the traps that abundance might bring? Maybe they're the shield keeping us focused on what truly matters. Not all wealth is a blessing. Sometimes it can be a trap. In His wisdom, God often allows His chosen ones to face financial struggles to protect them from the dangers that abundance can bring. Think of the 12 apostles. They could have sought material riches while following Jesus Christ, but they understood that true wealth lay in the gospel. Today, hardships like bank debts or financial anxiety may act as shields against the traps of pride and greed. Wealth without spiritual maturity can destroy even the best intentions. It's like giving a sharp sword to a child who doesn't yet know how to use it. That's why God withholds certain resources until we're ready to handle them responsibly. An example of this is the prodigal son, who squandered his inheritance and ended up in misery. Perhaps your financial difficulties are God's way of ensuring you don't fall into similar traps. Have you considered seeing your challenges as divine protection? Struggles also reveal our true motivations. What are we really seeking? To please God or to satisfy our own desires? When faced with hunger or anxiety, we realize that material riches can never fill the void that only Jesus Christ can. Think of Solomon, who had everything money could buy, but concluded it was all vanity. What a powerful lesson for those struggling to pay bills. True value isn't in what you own, but in who you are. This divine protection also helps us stay focused on what truly matters. Abundance can distract, but scarcity often forces us to look toward God. Have you noticed how, during times of lack, your prayers become more genuine and your faith more alive? It's in these moments we realize that, even amid difficulties, God is guiding us toward a greater purpose. Perhaps it's time to list the hidden blessings you've experienced, even in tough seasons. Another benefit of facing these struggles is learning about simplicity and contentment. When you live with less, you discover that many of the things you once thought were essential are just distractions. This doesn't mean wealth is bad, but it should be seen as a tool, not an end goal. How about you? Are you using what you have to glorify God, even if it's little? Perhaps starting with small acts, like helping someone in need, is a great step. These limitations also teach us to resist the external pressures of a world that idolizes material success. Jesus Christ said no one can serve two masters, and these struggles help us choose what truly matters. While the world chases status and possessions, those shaped by God learn to value peace, faith, and genuine joy. Isn't it fascinating how even financial hardships can free us from a never-ending cycle of dissatisfaction? But if these limitations are a form of protection, what happens when they finally lift? Could these financial struggles also be an opportunity to understand the divine redirections God is preparing for us? Perhaps, even in suffering, something much greater is being woven behind the scenes. Sometimes, what seems like an obstacle is actually a change in direction carefully planned by God. When we face financial struggles, like bank debts or anxiety, it's natural to feel like we're losing control. But could these situations actually be ways for God to redirect our focus to what truly matters? Think of the 12 apostles, who left everything behind to follow Jesus Christ. They didn't know where they were going, but they trusted the greater plan of the gospel. Divine redirection isn't always comfortable, but it's always necessary. Just like a GPS recalculates the route when we go off track, God uses our challenges to place us back on the path of purpose. Imagine someone who loses a job and, in their despair, discovers a new calling that transforms their life. Perhaps you're going through something similar now. Why not use this moment to seek God's guidance in prayer and ask for clarity on what He's trying to show you? These redirections are also ways to free us from distractions that pull us away from eternal purposes. Suffering often forces us to reevaluate our priorities. Are we so focused on accumulating wealth that we forget to seek first the kingdom of God? Jonah's story reminds us of this truth. He tried to flee from God's plan and ended up being dramatically redirected. Could it be that you are being called to a greater purpose you have yet to realize? A practical example of embracing these redirections is to start redefining your goals. If financial struggles have forced you to cut expenses, take the opportunity to invest in things of eternal value. It could be a course that deepens your understanding of the gospel, or even a community outreach project. This way, what seemed like a defeat becomes an opportunity for growth and service. It's important to remember that even in moments of uncertainty, God is in control. Jesus Christ knew that his disciples would face storms, both literal and figurative, but he also knew that these experiences would strengthen their faith. Today, those storms might take the form of unpaid bills or the anxiety of not knowing how to make ends meet. Yet in all this, God continues to work to bring us to the place he wants us to be. These redirections also teach us to trust God's timing, which is often different from ours. Looking back, we can often see that the most challenging moments brought the greatest lessons. A good exercise is to reflect on how your current struggles might be paving the way for something greater. Have you ever thought that what you're going through now could be the key to unlocking doors you never imagined? But if these financial struggles are a redirection, where exactly are they leading us? Could they be preparing us to break even greater barriers, like the cycles of poverty and limitations that often repeat in families? Perhaps God is using this moment not just to change your path, but to transform the path for future generations. Financial struggles not only test our faith and resilience, but are also powerful tools for building empathy. It's hard to truly understand another person's pain without having experienced it yourself. The 12 apostles, for example, faced hunger, rejection, and persecution while following Jesus Christ. These experiences didn't just make them stronger. They also made them more compassionate. They understood firsthand what it meant to rely entirely on God, which allowed them to speak the gospel with authenticity. When someone endures bank debts or financial anxiety, it's as if God is expanding their capacity to understand and help others. Think of how someone who has experienced depression is uniquely able to comfort others going through the same. This kind of empathy isn't developed overnight. It grows from suffering. If you're in this place right now, how about using your experience as a bridge to help someone else who's also struggling? Sometimes, simply listening can make all the difference. Empathy also transforms the way we view generosity. After experiencing scarcity, we learn to appreciate even the smallest provisions, making us more inclined to share what little we have. Look at the poor widow praised by Jesus for giving all she had, even though it was a small amount by worldly standards. How about practicing that kind of generosity today? No matter how little it seems. It could be as simple as providing a meal to someone in need or donating an unused piece of clothing. It's fascinating how these experiences shape leaders. Those who understand suffering don't just lead with authority, but with a heart full of compassion. Think of Moses, who was called to lead the Israelites after enduring years of trials in the desert. He knew what it was like to face difficulties, which made him the leader his people needed. Could it be that the financial struggles you're facing today are preparing you to lead in a more human and impactful way tomorrow? Furthermore, empathy brings us closer to God. Jesus Christ is the ultimate example of empathy. He chose to live among us and feel our pain. When we face difficulties, we are invited to reflect his love and compassion toward others. Have you considered that your struggles might be shaping you to be a light in someone else's life? Perhaps today, you are being called to support someone going through the same battles you've already overcome. Empathy also helps break down social and spiritual barriers. When we understand another person's pain, we're less likely to judge them. This makes us instruments of peace and reconciliation. Imagine the impact this could have on your community or family. Maybe it's time to turn your experience into a story that inspires others. Why not share your struggles and victories with a small group or even on social media? Your words might be the encouragement someone else desperately needs. But could this empathy we're building now have the power to go beyond the present? What if it's the beginning of a movement to break cycles of poverty and suffering that have persisted in so many families? Perhaps God is using your financial struggles as a tool to build something much greater, something that will impact not just your life, but also future generations. Many families carry cycles of poverty, financial mismanagement, and emotional suffering from one generation to the next. These patterns feel so ingrained that they seem like curses. Yet, God has the power to break these chains. The 12 apostles were called not only to leave their past behind, but also to bring new hope to the world through the gospel. Today, God calls his chosen ones to confront and overcome these battles, starting within their own families. Breaking cycles of poverty and poor financial habits takes courage and effort. Often, It begins with small changes, like learning how to better manage resources. If you're dealing with bank debts or financial anxiety, maybe it's time to reevaluate your habits. How about starting a simple financial plan or reading books like Secrets of the Millionaire Mind, which can help reprogram the way you think about money? Change begins with knowledge and action. These cycles often include emotional and spiritual struggles, like anxiety or depression, that affect multiple generations. It's important to remember that God doesn't just heal finances, but also hearts and souls. Just as Jesus Christ brought healing to many, He can also bring renewal to your family. Perhaps now is the time to seek Christian counseling or start a family prayer group. Sometimes, transformation begins with an honest conversation and a step of faith. Beyond breaking these cycles, God calls us to create new patterns for future generations. Imagine how powerful it would be to teach your children or nieces and nephews to live differently, based on gospel principles. If you've learned to value every penny and trust God, why not share those lessons with them? A good starting point could be discussing financial stewardship as a family or involving young people in small budgeting and generosity projects. These generational cycles also teach us the importance of leaving a legacy. It's not just about money, but about values, faith, and a generous heart. Think about how you can be the turning point for your family's history. Have you imagined being remembered as the one who changed everything? It could be as simple as teaching the value of saving, or as profound as sharing how God sustained you through life's toughest moments. Breaking these chains is also an act of obedience and faith. Often, God allows us to face financial struggles so we can be the pioneers of change in our lineage. Like the apostles, who paved the way for the expansion of the gospel, you may be called to open doors that once seemed locked. But this requires persistence and trust that God is walking alongside you. Have you considered how every decision you make today could have an eternal impact? But what if these cycles aren't just about you? What if God is using your struggles to build a legacy that will bless entire generations? Perhaps the battles you face today are just the beginning of a greater story, where the fruits of your obedience and perseverance will ripple out with lasting and transformative impact. Now that you understand that your financial struggles, anxiety, and even cycles of suffering are part of a greater plan, the question remains, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you keep fighting with the same tools, or will you finally trust that God is preparing you for something extraordinary? Remember, the 12 apostles faced hunger and rejection before becoming pillars of the gospel. Perhaps, just like them, you are in the middle of a journey you cannot yet fully understand. Your financial challenges are not the end of the story. They are the beginning of a profound learning process, a school of faith where God teaches lessons no material success can provide. So, what can you do today to align your decisions with this greater plan? Maybe it's time to organize your finances, seek spiritual guidance, or start transforming small habits that are holding you back. The important thing is to take the first step. And here's the challenge. Share in the comments what impacted you the most from this content. Which part resonated with your life the most? Reflecting on this will be the beginning of an internal transformation that can change everything. Don't keep this knowledge to yourself. Apply it, live it, and inspire others in the process. If you want to keep learning and preparing to live out God's purpose for your life, subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss content that could make all the difference in your journey. It's time to take control of your story and let it be written by the hands of the one who never fails. What are you waiting for?